My name is Paul Ortiz. I am director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and professor of history at the University of Florida. It's really exciting to be able to come together this evening with so many friends and colleagues to this event, welcoming Black faculty to higher education, a racial justice town hall. And before I introduce our esteemed panel, I wanted to take a few moments to kind of give you an overview about how it is that we're here, why we did this project, Black faculty recruitment and retention. What made that possible as a research project at the University of Florida? Because it's very instructive and it's a great reminder about how community sustains campus and how campus in turn should be open to community. What I mean by this is that in most of the fields that I teach in and work in African American history, in Latino history, comparative race and ethnicity, labor history, et cetera, what's distinctive about all of those fields is that they came about because of social movements, because of freedom struggles, because of anti-colonial movements in the 1960s and even earlier. The civil rights movement in Florida opened up the University of Florida and allowed us to become, for the first time ever, a first-tier university. Because in reality, before African Americans started matriculating into UF, before women started matriculating into UF, before international faculty started coming into UF was really a second-tier university at best. And we established this fact in our 2-year presidential task force on African and Native American history at the University of Florida. And that was commissioned by President Fox, and I was honored to be a co-chair of that panel. But what we discovered was that during the the all-white institutional era of UF, we really were a second-tier university, again at best. And it was only because of these freedom struggles, the Black freedom struggle, the women's movement, the anti-colonial struggles, that opened up the University of Florida not only to new people, to more diverse student bodies and faculty bodies, but to academic excellence, right? We went from being a mediocre, kind of all-white finishing school to actually becoming a diverse, robust, internationally renowned research institution. Those were findings of the Presidential Task Force. But what made the Presidential Task Force possible is the same thing that made this panel possible this evening, this panel being based on that 2 years of oral histories with African American faculty at UF, both current and past faculty. And what made that possible was the Black Lives Matter movement, or the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so again, I want us to think about the connections between the 1960s era movements, which helped create fields like gender studies, African American studies, Chicano, Latino studies, the traditions that I came out of. Again, the importance of social movements, the importance of connections between institutions like the Cotton Club, the University of Florida, Santa Fe College, Eastside High School, Gainesville High School, and all these other types of institutions. So that in a nutshell is the thing that really created this amazing 2-year oral history project, which we're going to hear about this evening. What we're going to do tonight is, and if you want to pick up your program for a moment, and I'll just point out a couple of things as we get started here. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a history professor ramble. I got the thumbs up. Okay, 1 minute, all right. 1 minute, oh, that's an eternity, Gabrielle. Thank you. So if you look at your program, I do want to make a few acknowledgments. So first of all, if you flip your program to the back of the program, and you go to the bottom, we want to thank our co-sponsors who have been there for us. I'm not going to list them individually, but they are I'll say they're the usual suspects. They're there with us all the way, every step of the way. I also want to acknowledge my dear colleague, of many, many years, who is actually currently, Matt, is it the interim director or the acting director? Because technically I'm actually on sabbatical, which means I'm not really here. But Professor Jacobs is here, and he's done a wonderful job in shepherding our program. So thank you, Matt. He also directs the Bob Graham Center on campus. And the Graham Center and the Proctor program go back decades, literally, back to when Sam Proctor was one of the very few Jewish faculty members on this campus. And Bob Graham was a student. And one of the things that Sam Proctor taught me was to understand the connections between racism and anti-Semitism. And that's a topic that we really want to keep at the forefront of our attention now and really for all time. But I did want to acknowledge those connections. So here you'll see that on that backside too, our students, and this is a generational thing, our students love QR codes, right? And so if you're QR ready, you can get access to a lot of information right away, including many of the oral histories that you'll hear reference to this evening with current and former African American faculty at the University of Florida. And also, we're going to be talking about a really wonderful new piece by two of our panelists this evening titled Documenting Black Faculty Experiences in the Stop Woke Era, which has recently been published in Sociology of Race and Ethnicity. Congratulations, Yiorgo and Sharon. Let's give them a round of applause, by the way. This is a top, they won't brag, so I'll brag. This is a top journal in their field. This is a big deal. And the fact that it's based on oral history interviews and the work that our students and faculty and staff have done here is really cool. So if you look at the rest of the program, I'm not going to give long introductions to the panelists, but I'll just say briefly that two of our panelists are returning colleagues, if you will. And I'll start with Dr. Rahim. And Raja, if you want to. And so Dr. Rahim is actually a recent UF history PhD. And her work on black college basketball, African American culture and politics is really pioneering. She is an assistant professor at Appalachian State University, and she also received a very prestigious postdoctoral award fellowship this year at Emory University at the James Weldon Johnson Institute. Another returning Gator is Allison Mitchell, who is, yes, please give it up for Allison. She is currently a PhD candidate in history at the University of Virginia. And I was really proud and honored to be Raja Rahim's dissertation chair at UF. I'm an outside dissertation committee member for Allison's amazing PhD in the making. And these are two younger scholars that you're going to be hearing about on repeated occasions very soon if you haven't already heard about them. But Allison was just thrilled to be able to see her present at a panel at a sala in Jacksonville. Thrilled to reconnect with her parents who are here. If you want to raise your hands, parents, yay. All right. And Allison, while she was here, Allison was an undergraduate here. And so you were a double major in history and African American studies. So I just want to give major props to our African American Studies program. Dr. Dave Canton is the director. Dave, you want to raise your, thank you. African American Studies has produced incredible generations of scholars, citizens, people who've gone on to do great things. And of course, Dr. Sharon Austin is a person who really needs no introduction, but she's a professor of political science at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on African American women's political behavior. She's written numerous books, most recently, Political Black Girl Magic, The Elections and Governance of Black Female Mayors. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Austin. Dr. Yiorgo Topalidis is a person that I have had the honor of knowing many, many years before he started in our PhD program at UF. He recently finished, well, I guess it's been 2 years since you finished your PhD. He's went on to become such a popular history instructor at Flagler College. I was at a conference there a couple weekends ago, co-sponsored by Yale University, and there was a bunch of Yiorgo student groupies who were there to see their professor. So give it up for Dr. Topalidis. So we're going to start with a dialogue, and I'm going to ask some questions of Allison and Raja about their odyssey and their journey through higher education. And remember that this was a project initially that, and I should have mentioned this, this was a grant-funded project. We actually applied for a grant. Dr. Austin was the primary investigator, really kind of helping us, guiding us with the initial questions, some of which were what is working in terms of recruiting and retaining African American faculty at the University of Florida? What is not working? The backdrop of this was a staggering decline in black student enrollment at the University of Florida. And so the project was really engaged in with a high degree of immediacy and importance. So let's start with Allison and Raja. What gives you joy in what you do as kind of younger career academic professionals? What gives you joy, but also talk to us about a major obstacle that you face and how you have dealt with that obstacle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, coming out on this nice rainy day. Joy. So I guess I started writing a couple of notes, and I would say, just focus on teaching, I guess, within higher education is where I find a lot of my joy, especially being the fact that I teach African American history. I find joy many times seeing my students embrace the work that we're doing, the topics that we're discussing. Oftentimes it's profound just to see when that light bulb goes off in their head and you can actually see it and it comes out on their face and they're like, so this is why the world is what it is today. Okay, I'm understanding now. And then them finding that space to really be comfortable in expressing what they really think about the world in which they live and the society in which they operate, right? To the point where I had to tell them sometimes, I was telling Allison, I need to tell my students to close the door, because I don't know, it's getting real hot with the hot topics that they're talking about and the things that they're interested in and drawing, those connections to history. So I'll start with joy. I'll let you answer joy, and then we get to obstacles.
Yeah. Okay. Also echoing Raja, thank you all for coming. I also just want to point out too, she actually taught a class that I took as an undergrad, and I actually reminded her of the conversation she taught us about sports and understanding the system of the university, and she was like, when did I say this? I was like, girl, I listened to every word as an undergraduate, so to be up here with her means a lot to me because we're friends now. And she's not just my TA, and I'm not just getting a grade. For me, joy, when I started teaching, that was also a part of it. I truly was able to see it on the other side as a teaching assistant and having students just raise their hand and be like they're just so invested in it. And it reminds me of why I'm here and what I was invested in. I was that student who was eager to be there. And also, the Black voices, I think, as we both do oral history, capturing and having those Black voices, listening to the narratives, listening to people's experiences. A lot of times history is the book, the arguments, etc. But having that moment where you're kind of reminded of the people and why you do the work you do, I think is also what brings me joy in the academy and in my work.
That's a good one. It gives me something to think about. What are some obstacles? I wouldn't necessarily say it's an obstacle as much of it's something that I'm in the process of managing, and it is the emotional labor that comes with being Black in higher ed. I was talking to Dr. Ortiz leading up to this panel, and I've been operating with this saying this year that I'm everyone's ally, right? Particularly at a predominantly white institution, being at Appalachian State University. I am not just the ally for Black students or African American students or other students of color, but all of the marginalized, historically marginalized groups on campus. They see in me, right, someone that they can identify with, someone they can talk to. So it's kind of managing the stress and the pressure of giving yourself to students in that way, and to, you know, the people that you come across within the community who are relying on you to be a voice, to provide a space and opportunity for them. So it's not so much of an obstacle as so much as something that I'm embracing on trying to figure out how to incorporate in the larger aspects of the job and the work that I do, right? It's a part of, if we got paid for it, it wouldn't be so much of an obstacle, right? If we could get paid for that emotional labor. But I would say that's more of what I would consider obstacles as, you know, I'm starting off in my career.
As someone who's still in graduate school, for me, I think it was really finding myself and my voice in grad school. The program I was in, and I love the people I work with, but they hadn't had a Black graduate student for a while. And so it was me and one other student who came in together. And we took one class. I mean, we are still great friends. We took one class because we're in like different time periods, and then like I went on my own and I'm taking these classes. And I realized that how I felt about my work and the people in the works were different than some of my colleagues. I think I struggled with the fact that, like, for some of them, this being here and being in grad school was like, this is what I do. I do history, I make arguments, I do all of this stuff. And for me, like, some of those stories were emotional. A lot of my work is personal to me. And I think having to kind of struggle with what sometimes the professional aspects of being in the academy does is it kind of drain some of that passion and some of that desire to center community, especially from someone coming with oral history being like the most pivotal thing to me and getting into a more structured, traditional academic space. It was hard for me. Or, you know, just like reading a book and like this book I struggled with, but someone else is like, oh, this is fascinating. Some of these stories weren't fascinating to me. They were hard to digest. And so realizing that, like, okay, like, I came in here, I'm happy to be here, you know, I worked hard, and for some people, like, this is like, they just felt they were built for this. This space was for them. They never questioned it. I think that was kind of a little reality check, because while at UF, I did have such a niche support system, particularly with SPOP and AFAM, like, where I just was around people who all had that kind of the same perspective I did. So getting into that next level was also just kind of like learning the rat race of the academy, and like feeling, okay, like I'm a Black woman in this space and I feel differently, I think for me was an obstacle.
So we have a lot of pre-law and prospective graduate students here this evening, and we will also have a Q&A afterwards starting a bit later so that everyone can answer. Oh, I need to stand away from that, I should know better. So we'll have an open Q&A a bit later after all the four panelists speak, be it ask questions from the floor and from our Zoom audience. But one of the questions that we talked about earlier today, and Raja and Allison did a really vibrant kind of brunch time talk to a lot of students on campus, was how did you all pick your dissertation topics, and how did they relate to, both of you have mentioned community a lot, you mentioned oral history, connections. How do your dissertations connect to your concerns with community?
So community is a big part of my scholarship. I think just my personal identity as like someone who does this work. My topic actually came from SPOP. I was given a oral history interview, and it was something about a civil rights activist from Tampa. So it started very personal. I'm from Tampa. I love the civil rights movement. I'm learning about this person. And that developed into a larger project over time about politics, about the Black experience, about the South. So for me, it was someone else kind of showing me, like, start with something you truly care about. It's not necessarily just having a project you think is gonna get you that job or make someone else, appeal to someone else. It was find something that you are passionate about that's gonna get you through these several years of school. Now community, and I think we went, like, community is so many things. I don't wanna say all of them, I'm gonna leave some stuff for you, but I know for us, like, community was something I built. I told you about how the diversity in my department was. I found other graduate students in different fields, and we connected on our passion for our work, the fact that our work also engaged with Black and brown people, and we developed our own community of just talking about our work casually, but also like networking in a sense, because we realized that there's only so many Black people in this space and in the academy. And so you realize, even if you're not in the same field, like, that's somebody who later is tapping you for something else, and y'all are constantly in conversation with each other. And then community also just became the space I was in, picking up hobbies in whatever town you're in. That's a big thing about going to graduate school, because you're there so long. Like, I want to like the place that I live, but realizing there's always some form of community or interest in something that you like to do. So I know I told them my community was like, I go to cycling classes. Like, I like, the pop music and the dancing and the, clicking into the bike and stuff, but like, that became a part of my community. Just interesting things that I found in Charlottesville became a part of my community.
So how we get to the research and community? Okay. Within the research? Okay. So my research looks at the history of the CIAA, which is the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. It is the oldest and largest historically black athletic conference. And I look at the history of that particular conference through the lens of Black college basketball. And so, bringing in the idea of community. So my research at large, I have various arguments, but to address the question of community, I look at how Black college basketball built community and how the community built Black college basketball, keeping it short. And as I got into the research, I realized that I was part of that community that helped build, or that was helping to continue to keep the spirit and of Black college basketball alive, right? And actually being an active participant in the culture. And so my research, everything that I tell people I am a academic and community trained historian. If it's not for the community, I wouldn't be able to do my research. So I am a 2-time graduate of North Carolina Central University, historically Black college, a former member of the CIAA. So I grew up in the culture of Black college basketball, being able to do those oral interviews and rely on the people who pretty much built this institution during the 20th century. They have become now part of my larger community. They're part of my family. One of the women that I interviewed, who was the first woman at Norfolk State University to actually get a full athletic scholarship because of Title IX, right? She texts me, while I'm here, and she's like, I haven't heard from you in a while, but I'm just checking in. I hope everything's good. It's part of that community, having people that you can continue to rely on. My work here from SPOP, being centered in St. Augustine, Florida, having a community out there. So again, building community comes in different ways. Luckily for me, a lot of the research that I've done has allowed me to build communities in multiple ways. And so, yeah. And I also find community in the gym, and I like eating ice cream and having ice cream socials, and I like having kickbacks, so I'm actually having like a football party for my birthday coming up. So that's kind of how I find community around sports and those kind of activities, which again connects to the research that I do. And so, yeah, all those good things.
And Dr. Rahim, this is to you first. As an assistant professor at Appalachian State University, you are working with a lot of students. And could you talk to us about what are your students' major concerns now? What is it that kind of both excites them but also stresses them out? Because, and this is a self-interested question, because as an older faculty, I've been a university professor now for like 22 years. It's hard to believe. But sometimes as we get older, we feel like we're kind of losing touch. And so we often rely on junior faculty to like have the pulse of the student body. So, I mean, what is it that your students are like grappling with now? Because you mentioned early that you have learned to become an advocate for a whole different groups of students, right? So talk about that.
Yeah, I think some of the big concern, the overarching concern, may be the same as it was 10 years ago when 20 years ago, 30 years ago, probably when I was in college, right? It's kind of down with the establishment, right? That's with my students, regardless of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, they all want a space where they can be themselves and be free. And that is what they articulate. And so recently this past spring, I taught my the Civil Rights Movement course. It's a very diverse group of students across race, across gender, sexual orientation, religion, all from across, the social economic in this one class for all different reasons, right? I have educators who are about, being able to walk into the classroom and teach history the way they want to teach history. App State is really big in producing history teachers. Secondary education is really big there. And so they want to be able to not only know how to teach history, but find a space where they can really say what they want to say. And so that is kind of all students are wanting to have a space for themselves. And how do they go about doing that when they feel like there's all of these systems, whether they're visible or invisible, against them? And so we have a lot of conversations about, whatever they feel, whatever's oppressing them that day, or whatever they feel as if there's an obstacle in their way. It's kind of like I just meet them where they are. And so on any given day, I really walked in one day to my class, and I always ask my students, I walk in, hope everyone's feeling good, feeling great, how's everyone doing? And one of my students was really like, I'm just having a bad mental day. Okay. And so I went to my computer, I literally got to YouTube, I cut on ocean waves, just so you can hear the sound. I went to cut the lights off in the classroom. I really told my students to close their eyes. I took them to deep breathing exercises. I painted them a picture of laying on the beach while they were listening to the ocean waves, literally for the first 15 minutes of class, right? That's meeting them where they are, wherever their concerns are. And I was good enough to the point that one of my students was like, we would have thought you was a yoga instructor in your past life. So that's one of the concerns. Yeah, some of their concerns. Well, you're a current student. What is your concerns in the graduate program?
Well, I can speak as a student. Ooh, that's a tough one. I think my current concern is similar to your students' concern. I want to be able to teach and do my work in the way that I want to do it. I want to be able to exist in the academic space and not feel that I am being challenged, not for my scholarship, but for somebody else's agenda. So for me, I think that's the current state of where a lot of people are in the academy, is that, some of this work has been done for years. I'm not the first scholar to do anything in political history or anything. but knowing how important this history is to dealing with issues in society, like it needs to be done. Even if it's not me, if it's someone else, like it needs to be done. So feeling that we can't, do the work is something that I think concerns a lot of people.
Finding your voice. It goes back to what you said originally about being able to find your voice and being able to, have that intellectual autonomy and agency.
Exactly, yes. Wanting to be able to not only have found my voice, but have my voice and keep my voice.
So both of you are just outstanding younger intellectuals, and you both have already earned a tremendous level of accolades. Thinking about the Emory postdoctoral scholarship, the doctoral scholarship that you had at the James Weldon Johnson Institute also. I mean, these are two of the top fellowships in the United States of America. So we're listening to two younger scholars who have already achieved a lot in their careers. So I'm going to kind of take advantage of both of you and ask you, what was it at the University of Florida? You both mentioned African American Studies. You both mentioned the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, some other departments. But what was it at UF that, and hopefully people won't think I'm a terrible sellout here, but what was it at UF that really helped you gain this kind of like confidence and kind of early career success? In other words, I'm kind of asking, this is kind of what we asked during these oral history interviews, is what worked to faculty, what didn't work, right? So what I guess I'm asking now to think about, like what were some of the most important elements that you found here at the University of Florida?
I can speak as an undergraduate. Mentorship. I had really good mentors. I have a mentor here, and I also have a mentor who's right here as well, who mentored me. And we had some conversations earlier about the fact that I think you suggested, like, sometimes you have people believing in you when you don't realize that, like, what you're doing is important or special. And I feel like between the Samuel Proctor, Oral History Program, between African American Studies, Dr. Austin oversaw my undergraduate thesis. Then wasn't sure if I would do an undergraduate thesis, but I think having people who were there as mentors, not just telling me like, oh, you can do this, you're doing a good job, but giving me practical advice about wanting to go to graduate school, explaining to me like, different, programs and being there as a support system and helping me do actual research. I think to me, that kind of mentorship and the actual resources that came from that. Because I think it's also a part of this when we talk about like being Black in higher education, like it's more than just like the appearance of people and Black and brown people, but it's like the resources, the actual like skill sets that are being kind of built into you and like given to you that you don't even realize you have until you get to a space and you're like, oh, okay, like my training in undergrad prepared me for what I'm doing now.
How did I find success? We've been talking about the Sam Proctor Oral History Program for the past 2 days, and for me, it was literally one of the reasons why I came to the University of Florida. I was very clear in my statement of purpose that you have to write, that I'm coming to work with Dr. Ortiz in the Sam Proctor Oral History Program. I want to do oral history. It extended off the work that I was doing at my previous institution. And so then another selling point for me was coming to a university or institution with a good sporting history and program. Like that sells me. And so having, like we talked about it, the little things that people don't realize, right? Being able to go to a softball game, right? Just is a part of my research, but it's not really my research. I'm there to enjoy the game, but I'm also studying the game, right? Having, and it's a part of what Allison just said, is those resources that UF was able to provide me. And for me, one of those resources is the athletics here at the university. So being able to go again to a softball game or to a track meet or to a football game, basketball game, those type of things, it's what I was interested in doing. And so it's always, good to, for me and for who I was and what I was researching, to have that. And then again, the mentorship, we can look around the room. I took a class with Dr. Austin, or it was me meeting you in the beginning and talking about, how do I actually bridge sports out into like the urban environment, and we started talking about stadiums, and so that's how it gets back to, stadiums and college campuses, and so that's how it gets back to the class that I did with Allison. Of course, my dissertation and doctoral advisor, Dr. Ortiz, and his mentorship. When I see Dr. Jacob sitting there and out here in the audience, it was a part of all of that, where I went to Dr. Jacobs and say, hey, I'm interested in sports. There's not any sports history courses being offered. I understand through a former graduate student that this is what you do as well. Can we have an independent study? So it's finding those resources, human resources, the physical resources, the monetary resources, and the sporting resources for me.
So one last question, and we're going to transition over to Yiorgo and Sharon, but because we have a lot of students in the audience, what's one thing or maybe two things that you wish you had done as a student here, as a grad student or undergrad? If you could kind of go back in time, would you do differently maybe? Or maybe your experience at UF was perfect.
Do the reading. Read. When they tell you to read, just read.
Thank
then
you.
You will save yourself the trouble when you decide to go off to a graduate program or a professional program, and you would say, if I would have just done that reading in this class, I would have a better basic understanding of where I'm going now in my graduate program. So I would say read, and I would say grab every opportunity that you can, that can come your way. Step out on fear and get every opportunity that you can to be successful.
I just want to second, do the readings. That is, because, I still remember my first grad course. I did undergrad. I didn't get an MA, so I went into grad school, and I remember seeing 3 books on the syllabus for 1 week, and I was like, we must be going through this. Maybe it's I don't know. So I asked the student next to me, I was like, hey, you notice there's 3 books on here? And he's like, yeah, that's due Friday. And I was like, oh, okay. So let's figure this out. And I think about, the stuff that you read in undergrad, a lot of that is you getting that kind of close reading with a professor and them kind of giving you so much. And I would just highly, encourage do the readings. I did enough of the readings, that much I'll say. I think something else would be, I'd like to think I took advantage of a lot of the resources here within my field, but, and I told you this earlier, it was certain stuff I didn't do. Now as a grad student, I'm conferences in larger institutions outside of my university, I'm realizing how important that networking is. And I've been decent at networking in general, but I also think about some of that stuff I probably could have did in undergrad as well. I was very hesitant about fully being a historian, and then I got to grad school, I was like, oh, I'm very much a historian. So I think maybe in that regard, because I say taking kind of that leap of faith and trying different things, this will probably be something. But yeah, y'all, please read, I'm telling you, read.
Warms an old professor's heart. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Allison and Raja. Let's give them a round of applause for just a... So now we're going to turn to Sharon and Yiorgo, and I mentioned that at the outset, and you can see in the program, and you can eventually, hopefully, read this piece. I started reading it today, and it's really a fabulous piece. I just really want to commend both of you. The piece is titled Documenting Black Faculty Experiences in the Stop Woke Era, And we've asked both of you to talk about that, kind of the making of the piece. I'm going to bring the microphone over, in fact, right now. But if you maybe could take us back to the beginning, because Dr. Austin, you were the primary investigator for the Black Faculty and Recruitment and Retention Project, and you were directing a lot of the oral history interviews. So maybe take us back and then kind of take us forward into the writing of the piece.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. But before we get started, I want to make a small selfish plug for two things that are coming up. First of all, if you're an undergrad or grad student, every year I teach the African Americans in Paris class. And that is a spring break class that takes place in Paris, France. I left a flyer on the back table if you want information, or you can just look at my website. So that class will be offered during spring break next semester. And then also I found out about another opportunity, and we're looking for about maybe 5 or 6 students to participate in a Teach the Truth tour. Dr. Marvin Dunn is a professor emeritus of Florida International. And he also has written a book on Black Miami, and he leads these, he used to mostly lead these tours to high school students, but now he's expanding it and he's leading them to college students. And that will take place November 11th and 12th. And the way it works is that he takes you, like they'll pick you up somewhere near campus. There will be a bus, probably about 25 UF students and faculty are going, and they will take you to places like Rosewood and other places in the surrounding area between here and Lake City. We spend the night in Lake City, and then we tour places that are mostly in like the north central part of Florida. So they pick you up that morning on the 11th, and then you come back, you spend the night in probably Lake City, and then come back the next day probably at about 5 o'clock in the evening, and it's free, except for your meals. So if you're interested in going, you can just let me know. After this event ends, just let me know. But anyway, enough with me publicizing my things. But first of all, I just wanted to just talk a little bit about, Yiorgo is going to talk more so about the article that we just published, but I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that were happening in 2020 that resulted in the grant that we received and the research that we were able to do. I've been a professor at UF since 2001, and it seems like just yesterday, but I've been a professor altogether since 1992. I was real young then, but anyway, since 1992, so it's just hard to believe it's been 31 years. But I've noticed a lot of things in the years that I've been here at UF. People have come and gone. And when I saw this opportunity, the first thing that came into my mind was to call together some of my friends and colleagues and just do research and just ask the question as to why there are so few Black faculty here. What are some of the reasons as to why we have such a hard time recruiting, but even a harder time keeping Black faculty, minority faculty just in general? So I just want to talk a little bit about some things, and George is going to talk more so about the findings of our research. But in 2020, that was, a very important year in American politics, mostly because it will be known for COVID, the shutdown that began probably in March all over the world. There was an international pandemic. But even more importantly than that, in 2020, as a result of the murder of George Floyd and the fact that this murder, in case you don't know what this means, an officer by the name of Derek Chauvin, who was white, held his knee on George Floyd, who was an African-American man's neck, for almost 9 minutes, and Mr. Floyd eventually died. And it was caught on camera. So to a lot of people, that was something that was really shocking, but to a lot of us, it probably wasn't. But the fact that it was caught on camera, and the fact that this man just showed no emotion as he held his knee on this man's neck as the man lay, begging and pleading and basically dying, that was something that was outrageous and shocking to a lot of people all over the world. So not only was there a national racial justice movement, but there was an international movement all around the world. People were protesting this. And so that was something that resulted in UF establishing the Racial Justice Research Fund, because there were so many discussions about racial justice that had never really taken place before. So the university pledged $400,000 toward research for, quote unquote, to inform understanding of the Black experience, racial justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus and beyond. So that was the purpose of the fund. And we were able to apply for a grant and were awarded a $60,000 grant. And our project is entitled the Black Faculty Recruitment and Retention at UF Oral History Project. So I was able to work with a very talented group of faculty and students, including Dr. David Cannon, who is here tonight, Dr. Hazel Leary, Dr. Michelle Manuel, the College of Engineering, Dr. Paul Ortiz, of course, Dr. Robert Stevenson Jr. of African American Studies, Dr. Brunel Tripp of the School of Journalism, and also Dr. Kishmar Best, who no longer works here, but at the time was in the Office of Graduate Diversity Initiatives. Graduate student Yewande Addy, Dr. Yiorgo Topalidis, and Mr. Dania Fleming. So all of us worked together on this project. So the main research questions that we looked at was, first of all, what are the reasons for the lack of Black faculty and staff as well, but we mostly focused on faculty at UF. And second, what can the university do to better recruit and to retain Black faculty and staff? So George is going to talk in more detail about that. But over the years, I've noticed a lot of things that are too numerous, I guess, to talk about in the limited time that I have tonight. But I think just in general, from the research that we looked at, not only at UF, but for Black faculty at universities across the country, a lot of Black faculty have similar problems in the sense that their salaries tend to be lower. And a lot of people would assume that, you know, African Americans, because there are so few of us, that we would make more money, but actually our salaries tend to be lower. But we tend to do more work, especially in terms of mentoring, because of the diversity activities, the unpaid labor that we're asked to do, which usually, you know, we enjoy mentoring students and participating in diversity activities, but we do a lot of that, and oftentimes you're expected to do a lot of that for no additional compensation. It takes up a lot of your time, and especially for untenured faculty, it really can impact whether or not they're able to get their research done. Also, I've noticed, and this is also something that the research has found, that many Black faculty are isolated in their departments because they are the only Black faculty member, sometimes in their college, many times one of the only or one of few, even in their entire college, but they're very isolated in their departments because there are so few of them. Also with joint appointments, those have been problematic over the years. At my last university, I had a joint appointment that was a 50-50 split with political science and Black studies. So I know how time-consuming and difficult that can be because you're expected to do 2 full-time jobs in 2 different places. And it usually works in the sense that you have to get tenure in your department, but the other unit doesn't really have a say in your tenure, but you still are expected to do work in both units. And oftentimes minority faculty, especially Black faculty, are placed in those types of joint appointments, and it really is something that sometimes can cause stress and definitely can really impact whether or not you're able to do your research. And then also there are other problems, one in particular that we don't like to talk about, problems associated with the students that we teach. Because even though we live in a society in which no one likes to talk about racism, no one likes to hear about racism, but unfortunately racism is a reality. And sometimes when you have a situation where you're teaching a class, I don't have problems now because I guess I'm a little bit older, but I know when I started as a professor, I was ABD, and I won't tell you how old I was, but I was young. And my students were, some of my students even were older than I was. And so it was a problem because, you know, not only was I a young professor, but I looked much younger than I was. So I used to have people trying to question me, trying to challenge me. And, you know, I'm a pretty tough girl, so I can take care of myself, but that was a big problem. And sometimes you could tell that there was a difference. Sometimes you'd have students who just, you know, maybe just didn't like the class, didn't want to be there. It wasn't in their major. But sometimes you could tell maybe it was something else. You just had students. I remember I was teaching this one class, and it was called Women of Color in the Law. I even teach that class here. And I had a class, and a Black female student was giving a presentation, and I forget what she was talking about, but she was like summarizing a case. And so she described the plaintiff, as the book described the plaintiff, as being someone who was uneducated, didn't have a good command of the English language, and poor. And so they didn't say what the person's race was. And so I was trying to get them to see that there was class bias against the plaintiff. And so I asked the class, I said, well, why do you think they described her like that? And one guy raised his hand and he said, was she Black? And I was like, I don't know if she's Black or not, but I was like, that's the first thing he thought when I described a person with those characteristics, was she Black? And then, you know, you have students who sometimes try to question, and challenge your knowledge. And so, you know, sometimes you can tell that this isn't a case in which you just have an overly eager student. You just have someone who may just think that you don't know what you're talking about because you're black. And couple that with the fact that I was a young professor as well. So those are sometimes problems as well that black faculty, I think all faculty have their problems, but sometimes I think when you're a black faculty member, you can tell that something else is going on. So in terms of the research, those are some of the things we found in the literature, and those are things that I even have observed on my own. So before I turn it over to Yiorgo, I want to talk about some of the things that have happened since 2020, because in 2020, everybody was talking about race, was shocked about George Floyd, and then there were other racialized crimes as well with Breonna Taylor, with Ahmaud Arbery, and people were really outraged. But now we're in a totally different type of political climate. Now we're in what we call in our research the Stop Woke era that many of us are familiar with, especially here in Florida. And now we're running to a totally different set of circumstances that make it difficult to recruit and retain black faculty because of all of these different, we're being bombarded by all of these different laws. And it isn't just here in Florida, but it's all across the nation. But Florida is definitely known for some of the laws, especially the Stop Woke Act. So there are so many, I can't talk about all of them, but even since 2021, I just want to briefly summarize just these types of laws that have actually been passed or proposed, but mostly have been passed here in the state, that are making it so that, you know, even with not just black faculty, but faculty in general who do research on race don't want to come here because they're, you know, afraid that if they take a position in Florida, they may not be able to do the research that they want to do because of the political climate here in the state. So in 2021, HB1, there's so many different numbers I'm glad I have my notes here, but HB1 was passed and it became law. It criminalizes being at a protest when other people are committing violence by defining it as a riot. So in other words, if you're at a protest, even if you're not engaging in violence, if someone else is, and you just happen to be a person that happens to be there, you can be arrested and could be accused of being charged with a riot. And also, if you are arrested, it's more difficult for you to get out of jail. So they not only do, I guess in the state, they want people to be arrested, but also to stay in jail. So that sort of discourages people from protesting things if you know that you're going to have to be the target of this. And then there's HB 233, which was also passed in 2021. It requires every Florida institution and state university to survey its students annually to assess quote unquote intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity at institutions. And also it allows students to record video or audio of class lectures for quote unquote their personal educational use in connection with a complaint to the public institution of higher education where the recording was made or as evidence in or in preparation for a criminal or civil proceeding. So what that means is that as a professor, you can be teaching, and it not only applies to the lectures that you give, it also applies to your research, your writings, your commentary, whether published or unpublished. So let's say as a professor, many of us engage in a lot of public intellectual work, and you might be asked a question and have someone interview you from a newspaper, or you might be asked to appear on a local news show and talk about some issue, and you might say something and some student may not like it. According to this law, that student can challenge you because you are, you're doing something to impact their intellectual freedom. But even if you're teaching a class, you might say something in class. Students have a right to record your lectures and can use that against you and bring some type of proceeding against you, and you face a possible punishment because of something, an opinion you might have expressed in class or reading that you might have assigned. So this is something, when people are thinking about coming to Florida, they have to question, do they really want to come here if they know that this is the way that they might possibly be treated? A lot of you probably have heard of HB 7, the Stop Woke Act. This is a classroom censorship law which severely restricts Florida educators and students from learning and talking about issues related to race and gender in higher education classrooms. It was signed into law in April of 2022 by the governor. It prohibits lessons or trainings that teach that individuals are inherently racist or sexist because of their race or sex, that people are privileged or oppressed due to their race or sex or other concepts. So for example, let's say you're teaching about affirmative action, or let's say you're teaching about slavery. I mean, you have to tell the truth. Or even if you're talking about something like the civil rights movement in the past and present, you have to tell the truth about the way things were in the past and present. This is something that you might possibly be punished because of something that you mention in class, or something that you talk about pertaining to something like racial discrimination, racial segregation. And if you do talk about it, it says here, to clarify, that it says that you can discuss racial oppression, racial segregation, and racial discrimination in a quote-unquote age-appropriate manner. So you can talk about those things, but they want to, I guess, monitor the way, they want to tell you how to talk about race and racism. So that's something that a lot of people find very offensive, and that also is a law that is the subject of a lawsuit called Purnell versus Lamb. And then most recently, and this is where I'll end, and that Yiorgo will take over, but SB 266 has banned spending on any campus programs or activities that advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or encourage political or social activism. So in other words, even a program maybe like this one is something that might possibly not be allowed according to SB 266. It also prohibits general education courses that teach about identity politics or certain quote-unquote disfavored theories like systemic racism. So that might impact not only courses and not only professors, but entire programs like African American Studies, which both of our scholars tonight have talked about the positive influence that that program has had in their lives, like women's studies, like any study that deals with LGBTQ or sexual orientation, anything that deals with systemic racism. So it might just not just impact individual courses, it might impact entire departments or entire programs of courses. And then also, as part of SB 266, it allows the governor's political appointees to engage in a periodic post-tenure review of university faculty. So that means that people like myself, who is tenured, people like Dr. Ortiz and others in this room who have gone through the tenure process, after you get tenure, you think that you've got pretty much job security for the rest of your career. It allows them to conduct a post-tenure review. And if you know anything about the tenure process, then you know it can be very political. You can have published, you can have done all the things you think you were supposed to do on paper, but they could still deny you. And so this is something that a lot of people are concerned that it might lead to retaliation against outspoken faculty who challenge different things, who have tenure, who have the ability to challenge things. So I'll just stop there. So really, in conclusion, just when you think about all of these challenges that we face now that we didn't face before, when I first came here in 2001, I came to the University of Florida simply because it was such a positive and a progressive environment, but now there's a totally different political climate. And so when you ask yourself the questions that we asked in our research, why is it so difficult to recruit and retain black faculty? One reason and one explanation is because of all of these laws. So I'll just stop there, and Yiorgo will tell you a little bit more about our research.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Thank you for providing us with that amazing overview of the current political climate in Florida. And I will say that in listening to your description of all the laws that are currently impacting black faculty members throughout the state, an interview came to mind where a faculty member here at UF was hired to establish a program that would engage uniquely in the African American experience in its relation to the arts. And she said, you know, in the current political climate, how can I reach out to anyone and say, you know, come work here, come work at UF, you know, this is the place where you should do your research, where you should establish your career. You know, they would look at me like I had two heads on, you know. That was the feedback from our narrator there as it came to mind in you describing the different laws. The Black Faculty Recruitment and Retention UF Oral History Project occurred at a very interesting sort of crossroads We began the interview process in the summer of 2021, just as the political climate was changing. And the interviews extended into the fall semester. We sort of completed everything by December of that year. And you saw it in people's responses. It was clear that they were concerned, and some expressed even fear of what was to come as a result of these laws. But let me back up for a minute and ask some thanks to my colleagues who were there interviewing all of these different faculty members. We completed a total of 46 oral history interviews in that time period from the summer into the fall. And it wouldn't have happened without the help of Mr. Dion Winchester, Kasamba Kokai, whose last name means victory for the people, I learned, Mr. Omar Sanchez, and Mr. Adil Rahman. I'd like to thank them all for assisting with the interview process. This would not have been completed without their help. And of course, without the support of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, this would have been a very difficult venture to complete. So with that said, we set out to learn from our narrators, to learn about their experiences, sort of what brought them to the positions that they were in as faculty members, as staff members in a predominantly white institution, representing a group of people that historically have been oppressed in a U.S. context. And we came upon many different concepts and themes that we couldn't include in the paper, and Dr. Austin presented them here for you tonight. But what we could include, or what we ended up including in the paper, is sort of three major themes. So we sort of looked at this theme of silencing. We found that some of our narrators expressed experiences within their professional environment where they felt silenced, where they felt their voice was being oppressed. And that was one of the major themes, and I'll present that example for you in a minute. All of these themes, I will present an example for you in a minute. Others, expressed, the experience of racism and discrimination within their work environment, and expressed the possibility of attrition or leaving their job. Just feeling the weight of that on a daily basis, going into their place of employment and having to deal with that day in and day out, and sort of coping with that, and how ultimately, they felt that they couldn't, and ultimately they couldn't deal with it, and they would ultimately leave their position. And then one theme that was particularly interesting for me as well in doing my research, as I was completing my dissertation, working on my dissertation, a theme emerged within the interviews that was very relevant to my own work, which is on whiteness and the whitening process, and sort of understandings of what whiteness is and the differences between whiteness and white supremacy, and decoupling those two concepts. What was expressed was a need for anti-racist whiteness, which is something that is not new. I mean, we see this in the scholarship, we see this sort of in public opinion. African American intellectuals, activists have been saying this for years, that sort of the white American community needs to understand what level of oppression exists, and they need to start participating actively to make a change, and not just stop at words, but continue through to actions and actually make something happen, so that change becomes a reality. So we saw these three themes emerge, and what I'd like to do now at this point, if possible, is play for you examples of each of these themes. So the first is silencing.
I have faculty that are standing up and accusing me of being racist for including anti-racist language in our plan, for instance. There was a line in our plan, and that line is currently under redaction and reconsideration by the college upon request of the provost office due to its currently politicized potential to trigger our colleagues and appointed officials in Tallahassee. And I have members of my own faculty, not very many, mind you, it's not a majority, but there's factions of faculty within my own college who are saying we have been marginalized. We are being marginalized by this conversation around decolonialism. We feel targeted, and we're being made to feel uncomfortable by conversations about white privilege. We are the ones, you're the racist ones, and we're the victims. And that discourse, while I think we made the mistake of, I don't know if it was the mistake, I think for a long time, why would we ever consider that seriously? But I think that now it's become that the political co-opting of language that emerged in the academy is putting us in a potentially dangerous position, particularly as a state university. And so I'm walking a tightrope, the eye of a needle right now, trying to figure out how to maintain a very unabashedly forward-looking, equity-focused plan that the college wrote in a collaborative, participatory process, right? How to keep that language on its feet and also acknowledge that much of that language has been appropriated by a political communications and publicity machine that is, as we speak, warping it in the public sphere into a weapon to point against us. So I think that we've heard tell of such things, but I think some of us are starting to experience things that feel like things that we heard tell of like in the 50s. Like it's starting to feel like when you ask these questions about violence, I see more violence in my future than I do in my past.
So in this case, the redaction of that language, right? That's what we identify as silencing, right? This is language about decolonialism, language about oppression, and just coming to an understanding that it exists or it happened, right? And it needs to be acknowledged was enough for it to be targeted as sort of an element that needed to be removed. So that was one major theme, and like I mentioned, the second was attrition, so people leaving or expressing a willingness to leave their position, and sort of what does that sound like? So in response to the question of why are you still working here being UF, this was the response of one of our narrators.
It's a $1 million question. I honestly wish to God that I knew. I mean, part of it honestly is money. I am not fortunate enough that if I wanted to explore or stray too far from any career path, like that I have the financial flexibility to do so. I didn't grow up in a family that was wealthy, that was like, okay, I quit my job tomorrow and I have other people financially like that I could depend on in such a way that it doesn't matter. I've always had to work, like even in undergrad, and when I graduated, like I knew I still needed to work. I couldn't go back home, so that one is one of the biggest motivators of me still being here and working, period. And then the other one is because I honestly enjoy what I do here at the University of Florida. So I love working with students. I love helping them figuring it out because I was in their shoes at one point in time, and I knew how that felt to not know what I wanted to be, specifically with the populations that I work with. So I do work now full circle with MFOS students, OES students from underserved backgrounds and populations. So being able to want to get in their shoes and understand their situation and kind of feel that career need and being able to give back is also another reason.
And I want to clarify that shortly after this interview, this particular UF staff member left her position, okay? So even expressing on the record, all these positive things about experiences and sort of the way that she was mentoring and helping students ultimately still led her to vacating her role. And last but not least, I don't know if it came through here, I'm sorry, before we move on to the last theme. In the beginning of that clip, she said, that's the $1 million question, like, why am I still here, right? That's what she said. And then, as I mentioned, shortly thereafter, she left her role. And last but not least is this theme of, a need for anti-racist whiteness. And our narrator here positions that as a concept that she terms a critical mass.
And I think that what I've learned is that to make change in extreme conditions, you have to have a critical mass. And there were a critical mass of white people at the University of Florida. I know specifically at the school, at the Health Science Center, who embraced me, and they embraced other Black people who came there. And without a critical mass on the ground, little change will happen. So the question is, how do you develop, nurture, and sustain a critical mass of people? And they have to be people who are knowledgeable and who have power. And a part of the people in my critical mass were white men who were very powerful in the system, whose voices could be heard, who lived in the neighborhoods of other white people who had power. So they could say, well, I'll walk down to John's house tomorrow and I'll see if I can't have a conversation with him. Black people don't have that luxury. Eventually, perhaps, but that's not the way it is. We've gotten our information through formal memos and now through formal emails. We don't walk down to anybody's house. And we don't see him when he comes out to pick his tomatoes. That's just not the way it is for us. So critical mass, and again, one of the problems that I see is we dip and dab around equity and justice. We dip and dab in it. It has to be a consistent, sustained effort with accountability at every level in the university. Every department chair, every dean, every vice president, we have to have clear objectives. And the strategic plans, if I've known them in the past, in many institutions have been incredibly crafted rhetoric with little measurable metrics and almost no accountability. And they come and go every 5 years. I call that folly and deception. And as intellectuals, you should not allow it to exist. We don't need any more hypocrisy. We're not fooling anybody, and we're wasting money and time, precious money and time of white people, Black people, brown people, everybody. We just need to stop that. So we have to have a game plan. It has to be long-term, and you have to have some responsible people who commit some time and effort to it. And I don't think that's a mystery.
So what we see here in this last theme, as we identify it, is the concept of what some scholars called deflection. So whenever universities set out to create such programs of diversity, equity, or inclusion, or programs of mass hirings of Black faculty and staff members, some scholars refer to this as a diversity regime. So universities and these types of predominantly white institutions established diversity regimes to speak to and also try to present their willingness to hire and also keep Black faculty and staff members in the university. And these programs ultimately, as the narrator implies here, what they set out to do are not actually what they end up doing. In the scholarship, we see this referred to as deflection. So the responsibility is placed on the shoulders of black faculty and staff members, the responsibility of mentoring black students and students of color in general. The rest of the administrators are keep themselves separated from that effort. They are not responsible for it. They've already created this wonderful program that eventually becomes underfunded and understaffed and ultimately falls apart. Okay, so that is sort of one of the last concept we identified here. And I'd like to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, we are here to answer your questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Applause. So for the Q&A, I think I forgot to mention at the outset, we actually have a Zoom audience with us. And so we're going to alternate. We already have some questions from our Zoom viewers, and we will alternate those with our in-person questions. So kind of be thinking of a question you'd like to ask one of our distinguished panelists. And I'll start with the first Zoom question, which Adolfo helpfully texted to me, was really, I think, mainly to Sharon and to Yiorgo about your study, about the essay. How does the data that was found in the research that you did, how does that data compare to other schools in Florida versus UF specifically? Is this a specific issue at UF or in the state or nationwide?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the scholarship is clear. I think Dr. Austin sort of presented that scholarship ahead of the presentation. And the scholarship speaks to a broader pattern, right? If anything, what we did in this study and what we did in this project was just reveal what was happening here at UF and sort of applying these pre-existing concepts and themes to what our narrators were experiencing and sharing with us. So, I think according to the scholarship, we could easily say, no, this isn't unique to UF per se. It happens not only in other colleges and universities throughout Florida, who also don't have, the means or the ability to conduct such studies and to get these types of experiences documented and throughout the nation. So that would be
Very good. Are there any in-person questions? Yes, and if you could introduce yourself, and I will repeat the question for the Zoom audience, Isbeth. Yeah. So the question is, with these laws, and Dr. Austin mentioned several of the most important ones, have there been changes in terms of, say, intellectual freedom at the University of Florida and other universities in UF? And yes, dramatic changes. We are the subject now of many national studies, and even Human Rights Watch is actually doing a study on the University of Florida and other Florida universities, and the AAUP, American Association of University Professors, is doing an ongoing survey talking to faculty all across the state. And the laws have had have had a drastic impact. I'm the former president of the faculty union at the University of Florida. I transitioned off the presidency in May, but I still get regular messages from colleagues, not only here, but also at other institutions, public institutions in Florida, asking me questions such as, Professor Ortiz, I've been using this piece on women's history for many years. I'm thinking now I better not use it because I don't want to be disciplined. I don't want to get a poor evaluation. Or I have a piece by a black female author. I know that a majority of books in a lot of districts that have been banned have been written by black women. And so I'm really worried about using this piece by, say, Kimberly Crenshaw or Bell Hooks. Toni Morrison is another frequently banned author. They're all black women. And so these are the types of emails and questions and calls that we're getting now on a regular basis. So yes, this has had a dramatic impact. I can say that we've been able to use, because we are unionized faculty, And there's a reason that all 12 universities in Florida are unionized among the faculty, because this is nothing new. So the level of laws are kind of new, that they've clustered, but the struggle for academic freedom in the Deep South, and we are in the Deep South, whether you're in Pensacola or Miami or Sarasota, this is the Deep South. And the faculty fought here for generations to develop basic academic freedom. And our generation has decided that we're going to hold the line as best as we can. But the last thing I'll say is that there is a level of privilege. Some of us have tenure. Professor Austin and I are full professors. We have a lot of graduate students. A lot of the teaching that's done at research universities is done by graduate teaching assistants or untenured colleagues or lecturers that don't have that level of security. And the fact that one of the things that AUP and Human Rights Watch and others are really startled by in Florida is not the attacks on academic freedom. Again, that's, you know, as a professor, I just kind of take that for granted. But what they're startled by is the failure of university and college presidents, deans, administrators to step up and to affirm the values and the importance of especially the affected topics, especially gender studies, especially African American studies, studies about racial inequality. And that's what they're looking for, by the way. That's what the New York Times and the Washington Post, I've had many interviews where they've said, can you find one university or college president, Professor Ortiz, that will make an abstract statement in favor of intellectual freedom? We're just looking for one.
Yeah, I would say the same thing as far as the administration. I don't mean to criticize them, but we're just here to tell the truth. I haven't seen anyone confirming. I mean, behind closed doors, they probably do, but they haven't issued any type of statement saying that we support diversity or we support these programs. I've not seen it. And then also I've seen, as Paul mentioned, he and I are tenured faculty. We're full professors, so we have more of an ability to speak out and to say no. There still might be some punishments or repercussions, but we can at least say no because we have, as of now at least, job security. But for people who are untenured, and especially for students who are graduate teaching assistants who might want to teach a class that deals with some of the theories that now are banned, they have a different situation in the sense that they have to pretty much do whatever they're told, because if they're untenured, then they could lose their jobs. If they're students, then they could probably lose their funding. So they're in a totally different situation. So it is sort of an environment of fear, but you know, you have to take a stand because, I mean, I guess people say to me that, oh, it's easy for you to take a stand, because I don't know if you all know this a lot or not, but I'm one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit challenging Stop Woke. And I'm not saying it to get applause. That's nice, thank you. But and people say to me that, oh, well, yeah, you of course can be a plaintiff in a lawsuit. You're a full professor. But to me, you just have to take a stand. And I always tell people you have to like the person that you see when you look in the mirror every morning. And as a black woman, I couldn't possibly go into a classroom and not talk about intersectionality, which is a theory that talks about the racism and sexism and class issues that black women have had, and that women of color generally have had to deal with. For me to say, oh, I better not say that because I might get in trouble, I'm ready to get in trouble. And so even if I weren't a full professor, that's just the kind of person I've always been. If you don't believe me, you can just look at my record. Even when I was in high school, I was in protest, and now my daughter is exactly the same. She's 17. She's exactly the same, and I can't get mad at her because she gets it from me. But you know, I mean, it's sort of like an environment of fear. People are fearful. I've heard of people changing readings, changing the titles of courses. We even had a professor who no longer works here, but he had a graduate certificate that he was going to offer in critical race theory, and he was told that, you know, if you want to get that approved, you might want to change the title. So those are the types of things that we're dealing with.
The next question for our Zoom audience, and I think this is maybe for Allison and Raja, when it comes to mentors, what would be the best qualities to look into when deciding on a mentor?
For me personally, someone who's going to go to bat for you. I think as a student, you don't learn, or you don't, and as you go higher in the academy, you learn about the different things that it takes. Like I talked to Raja about this, like what do you have to do as a junior faculty? What are your requirements, your job, et cetera? Like there's so many levels to the university. And so a lot of conversations are had whether you're there or not. And you want someone who's gonna go to bat for you for your work, for your not just your scholarship, but you as a student who is going to put your future first. And I think to me, that is the most valuable thing, because a mentor like that, they're with you when you start, but they're gonna be with you for years, because they're always gonna be there pushing you and also helping you navigate the academy as you learn about the different avenues, as you get into the space, particularly now, like having people who are navigating a very intense moment, right? Knowing how they're doing it and knowing that I can have that kind of support as I get into this space, that's something you can't measure. Like no book or scholarship is more valuable than someone who's gonna go to bat for you. Oh, a student.
I agree with Allison, finding someone who would be your advocate, your advocate, and who is willing to take you off of the menu if they're ready to serve you up, right? Because oftentimes, coming from having the experience of being a graduate student, we don't often sit at those tables when they're making decisions about which students get funding, which students do we move forward, which students should we have rewrite a 40-page paper for the third, fourth time in a semester. You need to have someone who is willing to put their foot down, who sees in you what you yet to see in yourself. But on the other side of that is also having some understanding of who you are and who you want to be. And then finding someone who is like-minded and who have the same, if you're like-minded, those like actions, being willing to actually stand on the front lines and go to battle. And so it's also observing. And you might see someone who's really cool and you might want them to be your mentor, but sit back, watch them for a minute, see how they interact with all different people, see how just their name alone rings a bell, right? When I go to conferences and as a graduate student and I walk into a room and Dr. Ortiz is nowhere to be found, but they ask, hey, who do you study with? And I study with Dr. Paul Ortiz, and oh, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be successful, and it's clearly true, right? And I'm finding that success, and so that's what I would say. And your mentors.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you, Allison. Question in the back, Khalid, if you want to. Yeah. So the question, as best as I can hear some of the overhead noise, but the recent study that demonstrated publicly funded historically black colleges and universities have been systematically underfunded. How do you get justice in such a system? And then also talking about Dr. Ibram Kendi, after winning the National Book Award, we lost him shortly after that. And so those are some of how do we get justice in this kind of situation?
Well, that's a really good question. That's a question that it doesn't really have an easy answer, because it makes you wonder if it's possible to ever really fully get justice. And that's why the attack on the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and those types of courses, that's why they're so problematic, because that's one step at least toward helping not just minority students, but students and faculty and staff in general to at least feel more welcome at UF. And then as far as Ibram Kendi, I worked with Ibram. I had the pleasure of working with him. I still work with him. He was a brilliant scholar. He was a rock star, a young man who's gotten even more of a national, international reputation. And it does make you wonder, maybe they should have done more, because shortly after he won the National Book Award, and to my knowledge, he was the youngest person ever to win it. He was only 34 at the time he left shortly after. So I think that that's not just a problem with Ibram, but what I've seen in the 20 plus years that I've been here, it's been a problem with a lot of really good faculty members who've left because they've gotten offers and you have just didn't match them in the way that they should have. There's a long list of people that we've lost over the years.
Thank you. And the next question comes from our Zoom audience. Is there ongoing or similar research or opportunity for similar research on retention with students, such as the one that the two of you did with faculty and staff?
Well, I think that, there is always an opportunity to do research, but as far as the racial justice grant, I don't think I know they had a round 2, but I don't think they're still offering the grant that we received. But there are always opportunities for you to apply for other national grants. And that is something I think that is even more troubling to me than the lack of black faculty is the lack of black students. And that to me is sort of like an elephant in the room problem when you're not supposed to talk about race. And even before the recent Supreme Court affirmative action ruling, Florida had already made it so that race couldn't be considered in university admissions here. And that was way back in 1999. But the numbers of black students, I was just doing a presentation a couple weeks ago, and I think that we have less black students here now, especially in the incoming freshman class, than we had when I came here in the fall of 2001. And that was the first semester that you were actually able to see the impact of Florida. So there is a need for research on the lack of minority students, but especially the lack of black students. But as far as funding on campus, I think there are different funding opportunities, but there's not a racial justice grant similar to this, to my knowledge.
The next in-person question, ma'am, I think you had. So incorporating more African American studies, African American theory in classes. I want to take things outside of the classroom because what I think is interesting, I do a lot of work, and this is kind of embarrassing for a labor historian to admit, but I do a lot of work with corporations. I just gave the International Hispanic Heritage Keynote for Wells Fargo, like the international corporation. I've done the same thing for Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Guggenheim Partners. The list goes on and on. I just gave a talk 2 days ago. I did the Hispanic Heritage Keynote Month for the Orlando VA, 250 people. And they all want, the big topic now for all of these corporations and veterans administrations, and I'm a military veteran, so I get tasked a lot with speaking to veterans groups. They all want to talk about Afro-Latino history. They want to talk about people of African descent from Latin America. That is one of the hottest topics in the corporate world. And it also tracks one of our former Samuel Proctor Oral History Program alumni who just finished her first week as an assistant professor at University of California, Irvine. Genesis Laura, who some of you remember, she is a junior assistant professor in Afro-Latino studies at one of the best research universities in the country. And so what I see is these topics gaining traction and excitement in the corporate world, in the legal world, outside of, and see, I think this is part of the origin for these anti-race studies laws, because the people in power understand that younger folks, not just in the universities, and in fact, maybe the universities not as much, but your counterparts in the corporate world and in the veterans communities, like where I grew up as a military veteran, diversity is just a way of life. Affirmative action is a way of life. President Truman integrated the U.S. military because he said, we can no longer win wars with all white leadership of people of color infantry regiments, just to be perfectly blunt with you. So affirmative action, quotas, accountability, that's what I grew up with in the military. And we were all in the military when I was growing up. So again, I guess I bring that into the classes, but what you hear here, I think, is a community of support. And so a lot of, these are kind of the usual suspects. These are individuals who teach these topics, who incorporate African American studies into their work. But my fear, though, and to echo what I said earlier, is a lot of our colleagues, especially those that don't have tenure, younger folks who don't have job security, feel that they can no longer teach those things in Florida. And the last thing I'll say is that I used to have many former students, mainly from South Florida, Miami-Dade, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, who graduated from the University of Florida and grew up in Florida and wanted to teach in Florida, make it a career. And in the last 3 to 4 years, almost every single one of them has left Florida. And it's heartbreaking. And they've left Florida because they feel like they can't. And the last one who called me last week said, Professor Ortiz, you know, I wanted to teach a unit on the Holocaust. And I'm afraid that someone might be, you know, if I talk about anti-Semitism and racism, it just takes one parent now to ruin my career in the state of Florida. One parent. And so they called me for a recommendation for graduate school. They're leaving Florida. And they grew up in Florida. And so what's happening really in the state is heartbreaking. So let's move on. Another question from a Zoom audience is, can panelists speak advice on how to curate intellectual and cultural gatherings now that the grant is gone? All grants have a life, right? And there is more surveillance on funding for bringing certain speakers. Are outside grants that way right now to secure that funding, or are there other ideas?
I would say that there are outside grants that aren't under control of the state, but the problem is that even with those grants, there's so much scrutiny on who you invite in as a speaker, and so that also brings some nervousness. And then also, even after the grant that we received, there was a round 2 of the racial justice grant, and we were able to get a second grant to continue the interviews that we had started. But you know, there's always the possibility of outside grants.
I don't work with grant money at this particular moment, so I'll answer that part, right? Because being I'm at Appalachian State University currently, and we're talking about some of the issues that Black faculty at the University of Florida face, and people are asking, is this just unique to Florida? And it's not. Particularly, I just recently, before I left, I did what they call a state interview at App State. And the question is, what is keeping you here as a Black faculty member? Because they deal with the same issues of like retention, keeping Black faculty, and wanting to figure that out. So one is not a problem that's exclusive to Florida, but it's definitely worth being studied across the board. And I think each of us, what I do is like we go out, you have to be intentional about building community, even if you don't have the funding and the resources to do so. We all, or most of us, right, are really interested in having this change and making this change. So it doesn't take too much to have a town hall as we're having right now, so we can have these discussions. And it's, you know, we've just survived, you know, the pandemic, which we understand we live in a virtual environment where this can also be hosted online. So I think a lot of it is not just up to like looking for money or looking for institutions or people who's doing the work, but looking at yourself in the mirror and asking, what are you doing to fix the narrative and to change what we have going on in our society currently and at institutions.
I just want to add something to community, because I also think we need to talk about the role of universities in communities in general. So this is not just an institutional problem. Like, this is a problem that's going to also affect the larger community where these institutions are based. So it's not just like a UF problem or an Appalachian State problem. That's whatever city or town or state, because like universities play a really big role in the structure of every city and town they're in. Like, universities is a term that people have started to use because of the role of universities in developing community spaces and, well, influencing community spaces. So even when you consider what cultural or social things you can do, you need to honor genuinely also look outside of the university's walls, because there is a community there who is constantly affected by universities. Regardless of what courses are taught, they're affected in various ways. And I think listening to them as well and creating some type of connection with them as well could also alleviate problems that you see in the institution. Because you aren't the only ones, living in this space. Like, there's other people who live here who may not be connected to your university, but they experience what's happening in those spaces.
So one more question. We're coming up on 8 o'clock, and we can keep the conversation going, but let's wrap it up here. And sir, if you can give us the question. So the question: what can community members assist people on campuses that are under pressure, under stress, tensions? How can we kind of keep these relationships productive?
I think venues like this, right? Events like this are important, and sort of providing the space and time to have these discussions. That's definitely constructive and would be helpful. That comes to mind for me, at least. I think every time I present in venues like this, I find it constructive, not just because I'm presenting research that we've done and we're interested in, but we're presenting ideas that audiences are interested in and communities are interested in learning more about, and sort of taking those ideas out into the world and sort of having impactful change on an interpersonal level.
To kind of echo, it's interesting that you asked that question, because as all historians, we always go into the community and say, hey, what can we do for you all, right? As a community historian, it's like, what can I do? How can my research bring light to this community, to this institution? But I think in many ways, we're thinking about panels and having these discussions. Largely, we need the community to show up. If we're keeping it simple, I think it goes back to, I wrote notes down from the last oral history that you shared with us. Can you share that with me, the full? That was good. But I actually wrote it down. This actually like a critical mass movement on the ground, right? So, you're here tonight, but where's your neighbors, right, that live beside you? And you knew about, for example, not you particularly, but this panel has happened. Did someone, as a neighbor, did you pay it forward to let your neighbor next door know that this town hall is taking place, so then they can let their neighbor next door know, so then people can just show up? It's about just showing up on both ends as academics and historians and scholars going into the community, and then having the community show up in support for the work that we're doing. Not saying that it's not happening, but keeping that relationship between town and gown, right, is not only historians and scholars and we showing up, but the community showing up in large numbers as well. That's what I could add.
Sorry, as we're going in the closing, I think not only just communities, but also us also in the academy. Like, we really need to, the people we need to uplift are those K through 12 teachers. I think the people we need to uplift, because they're the ones who are teaching the students. I think of myself as someone, I was from Florida. I knew I was going to school in Florida. When deciding where to go, et cetera, like, a lot of what prepares them to even get in the space, and for students to also fight for the classes that they want in college, stems from the education they're getting K through 12. Like, those are the teachers who are, they're at the ground doing that hardcore intellectual work with like youth, who are gonna later walk into, the University of Florida. So I think those are the people, I think us as the academy, I'm saying that as a grad student, but also communities, like, those are the people in the middle that I think we really need to uplift significantly, because they're dealing with this as well. Like, we know that much for sure.
Well, to kind of just close it out. Let's just keep the conversations going. Let's do more events. Let's be there for each other. And again, if you haven't had the chance to read this wonderful article documenting Black faculty experiences in the Stop Woke era, you can have access to it here. Please check out the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, the Bob Graham Center, Department of History, African American Studies. You see students, alumni, faculty, community members doing this really incredible work, sometimes under very stressful situations. But as a faculty member here at UF, I'm really proud to be here and honored to be here in such a great panel. So let's give our panelists a round of applause. And it looks to me like there's some food left over, right, in the back. Dr. Rahim, do you want to?
No, I was just saying if people have additional questions, I think some of us are willing to stay here to answer questions and have conversations, so we're here. I saw a couple of hands that didn't get.
And I also want to thank our camera crew, Deborah Hendricks, Gabrielle, Adolfo. Thank you for keeping us on time. Our assistant director, Anna Hamilton in the back, Donovan Carter, thank you so much for your work in making this happen. And thank you, above all, to the Cotton Club Museum.